Hey scientists, it's Jessica Power from Kansas City Public Schools, one of the science curriculum coordinators. Now, the last few weeks, Fred and I have read some books to you about how to be a scientist and how scientists use data to make observations and learn about different science concepts. Well, I want you to think back to a few weeks ago. A few weeks ago, we talked about adaptations and how animals have unique features or characteristics that allow them to survive in their ecosystems. We specifically took a look at penguins from the Kansas City Zoo. And we talked about how penguins had really dense feathers that helps keep them warm. We talked about the fat layer that penguins had. And we also talked about a really interesting, unique feature or adaptation that penguins have. And that was that they have little spikes on their tongue. And those little spikes are able to help the penguins to grab or hold on to prey because they eat things from the ocean like shrimp and krill. And we know that things can be slippery when wet, so shrimp or krill could be kind of slippery. And so the spikes on the penguin's tongue allows the penguin to be able to hold on to that prey to take it to land to eat. Well, we're going to expand on that thought just a little bit today. And we're going to talk about traits. So back when we talked about adaptations, I used the word features and characteristics a lot. We're going to replace those with the word traits today. Back here on our vocab poster, I have the definition for a trait. A trait is just a characteristic of a living thing. So for us humans, eye color, skin color, hair color, height, those are traits. Those are things that we have that are unique and characteristic to us. Now there's other things that we have that are also traits. I have pierced ears. Do you have pierced ears? Those are a kind of trait. I have scars from when I played softball and got cleated by other players. Scars are a type of trait. But what's interesting is that some of the traits that we have, we get from our parents. And some traits are things that we acquire. So we're going to take the word trait today. We're going to break that down into two kinds of traits. The first kind of trait is an inherited trait. That's a trait that is passed down from parent to offspring. So when I gave the example of eye color or hair color or skin color, those are examples of inherited traits, meaning they come from our genetics and it's in our DNA. Now animals, different kinds of animals, they have all sorts of inherited traits. Think about dogs or cats or any type of animal with fur. Their fur and their coat, that's an inherited trait. How thick the fur is, how much maybe a dog sheds, the color of the fur, those are all inherited. Plants also have inherited traits. Things like thorns or spikes or how tall a plant gets or the color of the flowers. Now I know we can put flowers, we can put the stem of flowers into food coloring or dye and we can change the flower color, but the actual color of the flower when it blooms is an inherited trait. So scientists, today we're going to be comparing and contrasting. We're going to be analyzing some photos of different plants and animals to compare and determine which offspring goes with which parent. Before we do that though, I want to talk about our other kind of trait. Our second kind of trait is an acquired trait. And these are sometimes a little bit more difficult to identify or pick out from an organism. An acquired trait is a trait that plants or animals develop through interactions in their environment. So I want to go back to the word acquired. Acquired means to obtain or to get or to develop. We acquire acquired traits, meaning we're not born with these traits. A lot of times we learn these traits or we get these traits through experiences. So earlier I mentioned that I played softball. Well, when I played softball, we would wear metal cleats, and sometimes those cleats can be really sharp. And so when you would slide in, there was a potential to get cleated by someone, right? Now when you get cleated by someone, that can cause a scar, or if you fall off your bike, or if you get a paper cut. Because I would hate a paper cut to cause a scar. Any type of scar is an acquired trait. You aren't born with it, but you develop it or you acquire it because of an experience with the environment, the things around you. Now things like pierced ears, tattoos, those are all types of acquired traits. They make the organism stand out, right? It's something unique, something that's specific to that organism. But it also helps to describe, or it's the characteristic of that organism. Now, when we talk about plants and animals, a lot of plants and animals don't necessarily have pierced ears or things like that. But we talk a lot about behaviors. Behaviors are acquired trait. So let's talk about beavers for a second. If you've ever seen a beaver, either in person or in a picture or a show, anywhere, beavers are known for their big front teeth. And those big front teeth are used for chipping at wood and breaking down branches and limbs in order to build a dam, which is their shelter. And we know that all living things need shelter in order to stay safe and survive. Now, the beaver's teeth, those are inherited. Those are an inherited trait that the beaver gets from its parents. Its parents got its teeth from its grandparents, right? Those big teeth are passed down from generation to generation, and they're common. Now, a beaver's ability to build a dam, well, that's an acquired trait. That's a behavior. Now, the first dam that a beaver builds is not as good as the third or fifth dam that the beaver builds, but over time, it acquires the skills needed in order to survive in its environment. Different animals, especially prey in different ecosystems, like rabbits or frogs, they tend to put on more muscle the more and more they have to run from predators. So the more that a rabbit has to run from a predator, the more muscle it's probably going to have, because it needs that muscle to be able to be fast while it runs and gets away. Now, predatory skills, so think like a cheetah. Cheetahs are really quiet, and they go through the savannah so that they can't be heard, right? That's a behavior. That's a predatory behavior, which means it's a way that the organism hunts, basically. So that's an acquired trait. Some cheetahs are a little bit louder as they sneak through the savanna tall grass. Some are a little bit quieter. That's acquired. So scientists, let's get into our first activity. I've got two activities. They're just simple matching activities. Since you're watching me on a TV, it's a little bit more difficult to do more of an interactive activity. But what I have is I have a picture of 3 different cats. And I want us to take a look at those cats. Now you'll notice that the first cat has more of a darker gray coat on it, fur. I see some dark gray, black lines above its eyes. Our second cat, the first thing that stands out to me are its ears. I notice that its ears aren't super pointy, they're more rounded at the very tips. And then it looks to be more short-haired, so it's not super fluffy. And I do see that it has some stripes or different coloring in it. And the third cat is just a white cat. It looks to be pretty fluffy. It has more pointed ears. I would say that those are more pointed than the second cat. Now, scientists, I have 3 kittens. And these 3 kittens go to the 3 cats. Our job is to determine which kitten goes to what cat. In other words, which offspring goes to the parents. Now, really quick, you're probably seeing some really obvious similarities, and you probably can figure out really quickly which kittens go to which cats. But what I want to ask you is, are you determining which kittens go to which cats by their inherited traits or their acquired traits? Are you observing the kittens and the cats based on those traits that are passed down from parent to offspring? Or are you making observations based on those acquired traits, things that they get from their environment? Which one are you using? If you said inherited traits, that's right. We can't really observe in a still picture what the behavior of the cats are, or what scars the cats might have, or how quickly they run away when they're scared or trying to get away from something. But we can use the inherited traits to determine which kitten or offspring goes with which parent cat. So let's take a look. My first kitten over here, I noticed its ears are a little bit rounded at the top. I notice it's got these 2 lines above the eyes right there. It's got a little bit different coloring. There's some lighter fur and some darker fur. Which parent do you think this goes to? If you said this little kitten goes to this parent, that's right. Now let's take a look at our second kitten. Our second, it kind of looks like a cotton ball a little bit, doesn't it? Our second kitten is covered in white fluffy fur. Its ears are a little bit more pointed. Which cat do you think this kitten goes to? Absolutely. This one goes down here. And that leaves our gray kitten with the gray parent cat. Now you'll notice some similar characteristics here. You'll notice that this cat has those darker lines up at the top, just like the dark gray cat over here has the darker lines. But as we made these similarities and compared the 3 kittens and the 3 cats to determine the offspring to the parent, we use those inherited traits. Now usually animals are pretty easy to determine parents and offspring, to identify which traits or which characteristics came from the parent and ended up in the offspring. For example, both of my parents have blue eyes. Guess what? I have blue eyes. Now, both of my parents have similar hair colors. My dad's is a little bit darker, my mom's is a little bit lighter. But guess what? My hair is a lightish brown blonde, normally. This is not real. Now, animals, like I said, are pretty easy to determine parents and offspring based on characteristics. It's easy to see the physical characteristics or physical traits that are similar between a parent and an offspring. It was easy for us to determine, of the 3 different cats, which one was the offspring to the parent. Now, plants are also included in our living organisms. So that means that plants also have inherited traits and acquired traits. Now, inherited traits of plants are things like thorns or flower color, like I said earlier, or the seeds that they produce, right? Those are all types of inherited traits, things that are common between all generations. And then some plants, all plants, have acquired behaviors or acquired traits. A really great example of an acquired trait among plants is sunflowers. Sunflowers follow the sun across the sky during the day. Now we know that all plants need sun. So a plant is going to do what a plant has to do to get sun. Granted, they're kind of stuck in the ground, rooted in there. But if you ever get a chance to kind of see a time lapse of a sunflower over the course of the day, you'll notice that the sunflower flower, the face of it, is facing the sun throughout the course of the entire day. Meaning that the sunflower head will actually face east in the morning and then change and by the evening face west. There are some plants like vines that grow up towards the sun. There are some plants that are ground coverers. Those are behaviors. They creep along the ground. That's how they grow. There are some, if you've ever seen like a vine that's growing in a specific shaped like wooden trellis, they're called, the vines will actually weave in between the openings or the gaps. Those are behaviors of plants. Now some flowers only open up and bloom for 24 hours. Others open and bloom for a week. Those are all different behaviors or traits of plants. So as we finish up today, scientists, I thought we could compare, just like our cats, some plant and animal, or some plant, parent, and offspring traits. Now, these are not super difficult, I'll be honest. There's a lot harder ones out there. But this will get you thinking. Sometimes when we talk about life science, when we talk about traits, we typically just focus on animals. Well, plants are just as important too. In fact, this whole idea of genetics came about because a scientist named Gregor Mendel studied peas. Yeah, peas that like you eat, pea plants, that's what he studied. He compared and contrasted them. He looked at the different characteristics or traits that those peas had to look at genetics to see are there characteristics that are passed down from parents to offspring. Now, he didn't know about DNA yet, that wasn't a thing, but he was able to identify that there are traits that are passed from parent to offspring. And later we learned that there are acquired traits that plants and animals acquire or learn, develop from their environment. So let's finish up with our plants, okay? All right, the 3 plants that I have for you today for the parents is a tree, a cactus, and a cornfield. Now you'll notice the tree is a pretty normal tree. Has a trunk that goes into the ground. It's got big leaves, big branches. We have our cactus. If you look closely at the cactus, you'll notice that there's kind of like edges to it that go around the cactus. It's darker green with those thorns or pricklies, whatever you want to call them. And then the very top of the cactus has that more yellow-white circle around it. And then finally our corn. Hopefully you've seen corn before. Those corn stalks, they grow really, really high. They plant thousands and thousands of corn plants in a field. And then down here are all the offspring. So down here is how these started out. So over here, you're going to see a field. We have some crops, some plants that are just starting to grow out of the ground. Do you think this offspring is going to become the tree, the cactus, or the corn based on the observations you're making right now? If you said corn, that's right. Okay, let's look at offspring plant number 2. I noticed some similar characteristics to one of the plants, the parent plants. What do you see? Yeah, these are baby cacti. Do you know cacti is the plural way to say cactus? It's not cactuses, it's cacti. Fun fact. But yeah, you can see they all have that kind of yellow circle, yellow top. You can kind of see the different coloring, the dark green coloring. You can see those little prickly parts of the plant. And that leaf means that this last plant offspring goes up to the tree. Now you'll notice there's just a single trunk growing out of the ground, single stem. It's kind of hard to see. It's got similar leaves. If we were able to zoom into that tree, we would notice that those leaves are the exact same shape and type of leaf that come from that little plant right there. So scientists, just to recap, all living things, plants and animals, have traits. And those traits are either inherited, so they're passed down from grandparent to parent to offspring, or they're acquired, which means that they develop through interactions within the environment. Let's go back to our penguins really quick. Now our penguins, they're not the top of the food chain as we talked about a few weeks ago. So one of the acquired traits that our penguins have is the ability to swim quickly. The faster they can swim away from predators, the safer they're going to be. Our inherited traits, we talked about those prickly tongues, right? They had those sharp spikes that are able to hold on to the prey. They have those dense feather coats that keep them warm in their ecosystem. So scientists, if you get a chance this week, go take some observations. Go out and look at some plants, see how they behave, especially since we're kind of at the change of seasons. You can start to see how some of those summer plants are going to start to behave a little bit differently now that it gets colder. And go take a look at some animals. Be careful not to get too close. You never know what a wild animal will do. But you can observe what the behaviors of that wild animal are. Or if there's lots of those one type of animal, like a squirrel or a bird in an area, you can make observations and determine what traits that you see, physical traits, are common amongst all the different types of that bird, all the different birds of that type, and you can figure out what's an inherited trait versus maybe the behavior or a physical feature that you may see that may be different between one of the group. So take a look this week, scientists, make some observations, take some notes, and see what you can find. Have a great day and a great rest of the week. We'll see you next week.